for.
All right. Well, I will say hello and welcome back to another episode of All About Balance. And today we are joined by Doctor to be Mr. Dan Dimmock. Dan, how you doing, my friend?
I'm good. How are you, Harry?
Yeah, we were saying offline. A little bit tumultuous is the answer.
Yeah,
I just think that I think you summed it up perfectly. That this lockdown has been the hardest, and it's been the hardest really because it's just I don't. This is a really stark and extreme comparison, but I'm going to make it anyway. When you're given a prison sentence, right? You have an idea of when you're going to come out. You're given a date, right? You're given a term of sentence.
yeah,
It seems like in lockdown, it's just like an impending amount of time that you don't actually know when and where because we're dealing with something that's a lot more dynamic than maybe the government thought it was going to be, and that's resulted in some changing of information, shall we say?
yeah. And I think as well, at least in prison, you can interact. Well, not that I've been, but you can
Sure.
interact with other people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's such an innate part of being human. It's like the socialization aspect. But yeah, this one's, when I said good, it was good through bare teeth. It was a British, yes, I'm good.
Yeah.
But I'm not good. But I don't think anyone is good at the moment, really.
No, and I mean, I really empathize with people like yourself because I'm nowhere near an extrovert, right? I'm
Mm,
about as far away from an extrovert as you can get, but I still miss my friends. I still miss going outside. I miss eating at restaurants. I miss going and training full time. I miss, all of these things. And, then there's people like you who are an extrovert, right? And you can sit inside your house and edit videos of your lectures that you've given, right?
yeah, yeah. Don't get to go up and perform then, which is really miss, but it's getting there, isn't it? I think. Well, hopefully, I think it's the sort of darkest bit of the tunnel to get through to get to sort of the light at the end. I think this should be the sort of last one. Touch wood. Um, the cases are coming down quite rapidly. So checked yesterday, and it's at the current R, it's about halving every 15 days, um, which takes us basically. That's why they're saying around April, because if this R carries on, it'll be around under 2,000 cases a day towards the start of April. So that's why we sort of see in April and stuff as a certain limit.
Well, maybe let's dive right into COVID stuff. What have you been working on recently? What new information have you got for me?
Uh, well, yeah. I mean, I've only got like the sort of reading, which is loads that I do, and all my sort of
Sure.
colleagues within the industry. Obviously, we've got the two since we last spoke. Vaccines have come about,
Yep.
and there's some really good advancements on those, and then all the new strains. Um, so in terms of the vaccines, they're just it's so good, really. The effectiveness of them is really high. Some of the technologies are crazy.
Let's talk about those technologies. What exactly is happening with these vaccines?
Yeah, so there's a few. So you got your sort of older ones, the original ones, but the exciting ones are the mRNA vaccines. So they're like a section of RNA put into what's called a lipid nanoparticle. So um, they surround the RNA because RNA degrades outside of the cell because there's like mechanism to degrade it. So it gets put in this really cool lipid nanoparticle, which transfers it into the cell, and then the cell makes that protein itself from the RNA. So you don't. The big problem with the old ones, it's really hard to scale up production of uh, the viruses because you need to grow cell cultures and then infect them with the uh, the virus. And then there's different ways that you kind of inactivate them, be it heat, chemically. Like some of the first ever vaccines, they put a bit of formaldehyde in to,
Jesus.
to deactivate the virus, and like there was a sweet spot. Um, and they just used to test it on prisoners and just be like, this is like over 100 years ago, but just see how much formaldehyde would make them sick, or like too little would give them the virus. So luckily we've passed that mostly. But yeah, so the mRNA vaccines, they're really exciting. And obviously both Pfizer and Moderna has been proven really effective. But there's a lot more interesting applications. So cancer, mRNA vaccines for cancer is quite exciting. I've wrote about that. If you want to, have you heard about them for cancer?
No, tell me. Look, I mean, I basically know nothing of what you're saying. My first subsidiary question is, what's an RNA? And
Yeah.
then we'll flow off that.
Yeah. Okay. So you have DNA, which is like the sort of genetic code,
Yep.
and a gene within a DNA codes for a protein. So, but it doesn't just go DNA straight to protein, because it needs to leave the nucleus. So it gets copied into like just like a letter. Say you're packaging it in an envelope. You're not packaging anything, but it's like it needs to be transferred, that code. So it gets copied into an RNA form, which can leave the nucleus and goes to the ribosomes to be converted into a protein. So RNA is just basically like a different form of DNA that gets but it's actually the one that gets converted into a protein.
Right.
So we're just kind of skipping a mechanism of sort of DNA. So you're in the intermediate stage. There's so many applications now that this technology is proven to work. It's really exciting for things like cancer. And
so talk to me about cancer. Tell me.
Yeah, so with the cancer ones, they can you take a biopsy of someone's cancer. So you take a thing and you look for something called their neoantigens. So they're proteins that are being expressed on the cancer that are unique to the cancer, rather than compared. So you look at the healthy tissue as well, and it might be that one is. It doesn't have to be like specifically unique, but maybe it's just expressed at a really high level. So you take that, you identify these with. They use a lot of machine learning algorithms and stuff to like compare healthy tissue to cancerous tissue, and then identify these, and then you can tailor, because it's really easy to make a mRNA vaccine relative. Like once you know the code, you just kind of put it in. You can individualize that to that person's cancer. So they do it with. There's a interest. It's still all in clinical trials. Like COVID kind of came at quite a good time, because this is all just developing in terms of science anyway. But so that they were testing this for cancers, and there's like, I think it was in a melanoma study. They're still only in like early trials, but they saw 50% of people like massively reduce their cancer. Jesus. And that was it as a standalone kind of therapy. When you're going to combine them, it can only kind of increase the effectiveness. So that's hopeful. That's really good.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds crazy, right?
Yeah. And that's one of the like testing times like this. There are kind of pushes us really.
Definitely. I mean, we spoke about this on the last one, right? Where we kind of said that, it's crazy to see just an entire global community of scientists and health professionals and doctors and all these people come together and be like, like fuck it, we'll literally just drop everything and try and fix this one thing. And the result of that has been catastrophic. I mean, obviously for the people on the ground, and this is something that I find quite interesting. Like you get to see both sides. On one side, you get to see all the incredible advancements that's happening in the field that isn't really widely publicized, and then on the other side, you get to see what it feels like to be a regular person in lockdown without having all the freedoms that you usually have, right? And I think that's probably quite serendipitous, is that you literally are on both sides of the field.
Yeah. It's but both I've taken a lot of like hopeful information in terms of the science, and then I'm also living through this catastrophic, strange world event, and trying to keep. I think the trying to keep just focused and motivated is just really hard at the moment. So, yeah, it is difficult. Some of my own sort of research into microRNAs and stuff is yeah, it's taken a bit of a hit, but I think it just being able to still go in the lab's good, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think that's really, really, really understandable. You know, I feel like everyone's kind of demotivated in a sense, and I think that there's something about, you mentioned earlier the innate human need for contact, right? Some form of contact, and
Yeah,
you know, I think to bolt onto that is the need for purpose, right? The need for something to work towards, whether that be, you can see real dividends coming from researching your microRNA, or whether you're saying, okay, well, I'm going to have to put this set together because I've got a show in 2 weekends, right? And I've got to make sure it's tight. I've got to make sure it's nailed. I've got to make sure it's this, that, and the next thing. Like, it fills you with a reason to get up in the morning and do something. Whereas at the moment, for a lot of people, you get up to merely survive and just get through the day, to then sleep again, to do it again tomorrow. Like, and the ending, the goal in sight, the purpose is purely to just be able to leave your house again without the social fucking pressure that's put on you when you leave, of somebody who's also outside their house being like, what are you doing outside? Do you know what I mean?
yeah. No, it's so tough, definitely.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so yeah, in terms of my own research, we can still go into the lab, which is good. But it's because there's so many sort of rules within booking systems, and like the amount of equipment we can use is kind of reduced. So I have to go in at funny times because we're all trying to work around each other in these like limited capacities. So yeah, it's really hard at the moment with that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and tell me about the strains. So there's obviously been a South African strain, and there's been another strain that's been found in Kent or something. Like, first of all, when we're saying strains, many people have defined that this is just a mutation of the virus, and that, nothing is going to cure it, and blah blah blah. Like, what's meant by the term strain? New strain, anyway.
So I'm going to be that guy and say they're not strains. So
Okay, sure.
they're so the strain is still SARS-CoV-2. So that's still a distinct strain. We'd call these variants, which is it's just like a kind of esoteric thing but so because they still cause the disease of COVID, they all cause COVID. Right. They're still the same strain. Now, in terms of variants, there's thousands of distinct variants. It's how, so they do genomic tracking programs, which we're really good at in the UK. So we follow those, and then all the time it's mutating, but most mutations are what we call benign. So they either don't change most of them don't change the proteins and how they're expressed, or if they do, it doesn't really cause any change because generally they're quite optimized for transmission and things like that. And I think we said it in the first podcast that generally SARS-CoV-2 is, as far as the RNA viruses goes, it's quite a slower mutating one. But it turns out it's kind of took people by surprise, like within the field who I follow, how some of these mutations that are coming out, like how much it's jumping. So I'll talk about each of the. So we've got the Brazilian one. These are like what we call variants of concern, where it's changing it's changing what we call the phenotypes of the behavioral properties of the virus.
So what does that mean?
So it's either increase in transmissibility, increase in lethality, so that or virulence, or maybe slightly changing the symptoms. So the variants of concern, you got B117, which is the UK one.
At least we've done something.
Yeah, something to be proud of. Then there's the South African one. So I think that's B1351, I think. And then the Brazilian one, which they call P1. That's the one of concern. There's two out of Brazil that are kind of concerning, but the P1. So there's with mutations that change proteins, we name them. So the one that's of concern in all three of these is one that's called N501Y, I believe. So that's the N denotes the amino acid that used to be there, I think. 501 is the position, and then Y is the one that is being swapped in, or it might be the other way around. But anyway, this 50NY1 has been identified in all three of these, and it appears to in sort of lab studies, it makes the virus get into the cell easier, and so that's why we're probably seeing increased transmissibility, because it takes a lower viral load, or it could be either lower viral load or increased lower viral load to infect, increases the amount of viral load that someone puts out, or it could just be that it infects your upper airway more, so that you kind of put out more in your upper airway. Now, in terms of if you look at like virulence, so how damaging it is, versus transmissibility, is actually a lot worse if you have a more transmissible virus, rather than say something that's 10% more 10% more virulent, so 10% more people die, and you have 100 people infected, you're going to get 110. But if you have something that's 10% more transmissible, because it's an exponential, you can get like thousands of more people infected over time, because it's an exponential. So it does make it quite difficult. At first, when the UK one was kind of identified sort of early December, everyone was fairly skeptical, but it does seem to be more transmissible, which is concerning. So that's, I mean, we've not done, it's no lie, we've not done great throughout the whole pandemic.
Sure.
But definitely the increase, how transmissible it is. So bottom end is sort of 40% more transmissible, upper end is 70%. That is really bad, really.
Yeah.
But the the UK one's not great, but in terms of like the effect on the vaccines and stuff, the UK one still has similar sort of antibody response. So it doesn't really impact either your natural immunity or the vaccine immunity.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was going to ask was, we've just spoken about the sort of the rapid advancements in the vaccines, but if there's new variants coming out, I take it that what you're saying is that the vaccine will still cover those variants, and those variants won't, as far as we know, right?
Yeah,
they won't be immune to those vaccines.
Well, so the different technologies, they have different effectiveness, obviously, because there's quite a few vaccines on the horizon now. But the good thing with the mRNA ones, we can update them, and some of the Oxford ones as well. They're fairly easy to update. We just put the newer spike proteins. Where it kind of comes into concern is the South African and the Brazilian ones. They have a mutation called E484K, which appears to make it kind of evade antibody responses. Right. And also now we are seeing that in some of the UK ones pick that up as well. And we're seeing, so that's something we call convergent evolution. Have you heard of that?
No, tell me.
So if you see like a sort of a phenotypic, like an evolution within a virus or an animal that gives it a certain characteristic, but it independently gets that in different populations. So it's not like followed a lineage. Like say you could have, I don't know, 3 birds all on separate island, 3 population of birds, and then within themselves they all develop a certain adaptation to get a longer beak because it gets a seed. That's a convergent evolution. So that's right. So these strains are developing this N501Y and E848K independently. So it shows that it's given it some sort of fitness over the old strain. So it's making it more fit, and it's something that, yeah, it's kind of naturally going towards. So yeah, in terms of like the ones of concern is the South African, Brazilian, and some of the new UK ones, because it does seem increase your chance of being reinfected because it does it escapes antibodies. So that is worrying. It reduces the effectiveness of some of the vaccines. So some data out today from the Oxford against the South African one, and a lot more people got mild to moderate symptoms against the South African one. Okay. But severe, like because what we want to do is protect against hospitalizations.
Yeah.
That's your kind of end goal, because it's going to spread so much anyway. Like as long as we can prevent the hospitalizations, we can sort of get back to some normality. It appears to still protect against the severe forms, which is what we want. But then the data from the Oxford test was in younger people in South Africa, so it's still up in the air. But yeah, I mean, there's luckily with the vaccines, we've got something called the pillow effect, which is they are so effective that we've got some leeway. Like if the South African strain reduces the effectiveness by 20%, that's still a really good vaccine, like a 75% effective vaccine against infection is really good. So against symptomatic infection. But this is where it gets really confusing as well. It's like all the different criteria for vaccine effectiveness, whether it's being infected or getting symptoms or being severe symptoms.
Yeah, and like I was gonna ask you, you mentioned that there are a number of vaccines on the horizon now. Like this is probably because of capitalism and whatever, but surely it would make more sense. I mean, I understand that there are businesses creating these things and these businesses need to make money and whatever, but you know, there's obviously competing technologies in these vaccinations, but is it not, will there, because essentially what I'm trying to get to is like, you don't want to vaccinate people with a vaccination that's less effective than the market leader, let's just say, right? So is there a reason why countries would purchase vaccinations that are not from the market leader?
Yeah, so the problem, so this is a lot with like supply lines and logistics. So say Pfizer's, you need to keep it -80. So that is an expensive storage unit, and getting that to some places in like sub-Saharan Africa, that is just a logistical nightmare. So there's other types of vaccines that are easier to store, easier to distribute. Say Johnson and Johnson are bringing out a adenovirus based one, which is like the vector for it. Their one you can store in the fridge for months, and it's a one-shot vaccine, so that is a lot easier logistically. Even because even in some countries, tracking people to get their second dose can be a nightmare. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Maybe like getting in contact with them again and organising dates.
Having them actually turn up.
Yeah. So it's really good that we've got loads of different ones. There's quite a cool one called Novavax. I don't know if you saw that one. So it comes from moth cells.
Right. Sure. Of course.
Yeah. So what they do, they get a insect virus called a bacillovirus, put a copy of the spike protein within that virus, infect a big cell culture, so like a big bioreactor full of moth cells, moth pupa cells, infect them all, and then they start making these the spike protein on the surface, and then they use a soap-like particle from like plants. Like this is the hippie vaccine, the organic one, and then it picks up all the spike proteins onto its surface, and then you inject that. But it's really cool. I was trying to figure out and like find out why they use moth cells in particular, and I think that from what I was reading, it's because it's when they're in their pupa stage, and like they cover themselves in silk, so they have to. The amount of like protein that those cells puts out is massive, so they have loads of ribosomes. So there's loads of like opportunity to produce proteins. So I think that is my guess of why they use moth cells, and because you can, yeah.
My question is, how the fuck do you even figure that shit out?
yeah.
What guy is sat at his house and he's like, I tell you what, lads, what we're gonna do is we're gonna get a fuckload of moth cells and we're gonna bang it in this massive vat, and then we're gonna use soap to scrape off the top, and then we're gonna whack that in people, and that's how we're gonna cure them. How do you even begin to think about that?
Yeah, it's crazy. So the guy that the original paper for the technology was in, I think it was 2013, and he like sent that paper to loads of the top things, and they were like, nah, this is weird. So it kind of got published in an obscure, like a lower down journal, so like a less impact factor. But then I mean, it's now been used in Novavax, seems quite an effective one, and because they started using it in flu technology, in some flu vaccines, because like the traditional way to make flu vaccines is in eggs. So you inject eggs with flu virus, and it mutates towards a form that's like less virulent, and then you do that, but it's really slow. You have to inject eggs. You have to have usually loads of chicken eggs. So that was quite an old one. So they started using this with flu vaccines, and then, but it's still a recent development, like 2014.
It's like, really.
Yeah, like I said, this came at a good time for science, but I think politically it was a really bad time in terms of kind of government competence around the world, let's say, and sort of systems, because we've just gone more and more towards decentralized things, and you need a really cohesive government and public health structures. But I think a lot of places are underfunded those, and it's been a bit of a nightmare.
I mean, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about last time we spoke a bit about excess deaths, and we spoke about, you know, the stuff that's happening to people outside of just dying from COVID, right?
Yeah.
And I wondered what your thoughts were on the ramifications of this virus not conducive to actually getting COVID and dying from it or suffering from it. You know, you spoke earlier about the struggles that you've had yourself. Like, what do you think happens to society? Do you think people bounce back like elastic, or do you think there's um, some real long-lasting damage that happens here?
Yeah, so there definitely will be some really long-lasting damage, especially in terms of inequality. As all disasters, it's normally the poor that suffer poor,
The
and like,
most, yeah.
yeah, and definitely in terms of long term, the impact on education is really worrying. Um, but I think sometimes people think that that if we just hadn't locked down, everything would be, other than all the deaths from that, everything would be okay. But people's behaviour changes, the healthcare system collapsing is really bad. So I've been thinking of kind of a conceptual piece for my blog on um, a hypothetical pandemic with zero deaths. So it's, you say we get to a point in society where our healthcare is so good we can deal with a novel virus in terms of symptoms, keep people alive, but we need healthcare resources to do that.
Total lockdown then.
Yeah, yeah. So you'd need, so say if without like oxygen, ventilators, or the kind of care that nurses provide, the fatality rate of COVID would be like 1-2%, like fully, which is really bad. So like, like ballpark 5, 10 times worse. If you imagine like everyone who's has to go into hospital dies. So you could have like one in the future where people are going, oh, there's no deaths, but then you have like 300,000 people in hospital. So yeah, it's like I think people need to think of like healthcare as well. And if you have healthcare systems collapse, you have like can't treat kids for because kids need ventilators sometimes for like really sick kids. So it's kind of difficult. And yeah, in terms of the economics, so there's a lot of, I don't know if you saw charts where you compare GDP loss of last year to how many deaths of COVID there are, but it pretty much just goes like the more COVID deaths you've had, the worse you've performed in terms of GDP.
That makes sense, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because you have to bring in. So if you didn't get on top of it, like New Zealand got on top of it, and then I don't know. Do you follow many people in sort of Southeast Asia or Australia, just seething with rage?
No, I have a friend that lives out there,
Yeah,
and he's just trekking around doing whatever he wants. But I think, I mean, basically after our last podcast, I was, or pre our last podcast, and then after, I was kind of keeping up with everything and looking at things. But in this lockdown, I just don't have the will to look at the same news cycles essentially, you
yeah,
know. And even with incremental changes to those news cycles, it's just not something that fills me with anything other than dread, you know.
yeah,
um,
yeah,
so I took self-isolation to another level and just fucking stopped looking at anything really.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I've deleted Instagram, so I only go on it like on the computer to check messages.
Yeah.
I've done that for most of the pandemic. I find Instagram is like one of the worst, really. So I only go on there if I've done something. Um, Shameless self promo, and then but Instagram's one of the worst. And the only like good bit of social media I have is like my science Twitter. But
Yeah.
but I mean, that's not great for avoiding the news. But people tend to be more measured, and like it cuts through the noise of the headlines, which is
Yeah.
really good.
You know, the headline that you get is something useful rather than something clickbait. And yeah, I agree. I mean, I use Twitter now mostly or outside of MMA, but for finance stuff. So obviously that's exploded in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah,
Have you followed any of that?
yeah. So I got into the stocks as well recently. I'm like learning, but I was into it just before the sort of
GameStop.
yeah, and all that sort of stuff, which is annoying because they've crashed loads of the other, like it's really messed
Yeah.
up the market for all my
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
stuff I had.
Yeah. For now, I
For
mean,
now,
those
yeah.
things will bounce back. But yeah, I was getting into it around January, February time last year, and when the first sort of lockdowns hit and there was a massive crash. Excuse me. Sorry. Yeah,
So,
when there was a massive crash then, and yeah, it's it's an interesting game, is what it is. It's a very interesting game.
yeah, and I feel like there's a lot of it's become quite popular because people that don't have much to do, so it's like this is kind of a new interesting thing to learn. It's a bit exciting, but also this is where the sort of inequality comes into it. Is there's a lot of middle class people who could work from home who have disposable income they haven't spent on holidays, they haven't spent on going out, and so you've got all this extra cash. Like, oh, can kind of play with it a bit, and there's the opportunity to earn more back on that.
100%.
And like, yeah, and
Well,
some people are making so much money.
yeah, well, the guy that held the most GameStop shares, Deep Fucking Value, his Reddit name was. Have you heard of this guy?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. So he made, I think he cleared 13 million in profits. Right,
yeah, yeah.
that's just an insane amount of
Wasn't
money.
it? It was off 40 grand, wasn't it? It's something
Something
like
like
that.
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Imagine making a 40 grand bet and earning 13 million from it. It's just nuts. It's just
yeah.
nuts.
It's not bad. It's not bad at all.
No, it's really not. But I think the one thing that it does show you is it shows you in some way that community is still alive, right? What happened on that Reddit substream was nothing short of incredible, really. Like, you know, it was like it really was mob mentality, but it was like a stampede of fucking elephants running through a stock share. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It was crazy, really. And okay, like as always, the house won eventually.
yeah, they did.
Um, but there was some people that made a lot of money, and there were some people that lost a lot of money. You know?
Yeah, yeah. That's the thing. I think on the surface it was good, but a lot of people, a lot of normal people, lost a lot of money on that. Because
Yeah,
I saw Forbes did an analysis of the brokerage, and actually a lot of people, the majority of people who were buying GameStop were still like hedge funds and traditional things.
yeah, yeah.
So even though like yeah, Melvin Capital and those had shorted them, the other hedge funds could smell blood in the water and was
Of
like, oh,
course.
got an opportunity to sort of pump and dump here.
Yeah. And
There's
not only that, they had an opportunity to bankrupt their competitors, right?
yeah, yeah,
And you know, that's essentially what happened. You know, the vast market share wasn't retail; it was hedge funds still. And this is kind of the problem is okay. Like think about this. Like think about the domination of hedge funds. If you've got a Reddit substream with what was it, 5 million accounts now a good portion of those will be fake accounts created by hedge funds to try and dissuade people from putting money in, right?
yeah,
But let's say there was 2.5 to 3 million real honest accounts, and they all put money in, and they got fucked by about 10 hedge funds eventually.
yeah,
That's insane.
yeah, 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 kind of,
That is absolutely insane.
yeah. And that's pretty much what happened, really. I mean, quite a few people did. The little guys did make money.
Yeah.
Um,
What it showed, right? What it showed is that I mean, I have a friend called Ian and Josh who sort of know way more about this than I do. And they were saying that this shows that shorting a stock is essentially dead, because if you can galvanize enough people, you can destroy those stocks really, really quickly and really easily. Right now, does it come to a detriment to you? Yes, probably at the end it does come to a detriment to you, but it proves the model that aggressively, excessively shorting a stock is benign.
Yeah,
Melvin Capital, for instance, had shorted the stock 170%. That's not even possible because there's not 170% of stocks. And then Reddit was like, we're going to fuck you over.
yeah, yeah, definitely. Because shorting still does have value within the market.
Of course. Yeah, of
Yeah,
course. But
like
not shorting to that extent.
no, no, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and it's predatory what they were doing, but
That's the
yeah,
game, though.
yeah,
That's what
yeah,
they play,
yeah, and I think this is where we're going to see a new era of sort of social media, sort of uh, crowdsourced finance in that terms of just like trends and meme stocks, and memes infest everything from our politics, science, and now we have meme finance where it's like dog coin going up. It's
Yeah. I mean, look, I think
worth.
one of the predictions
Yeah,
one of my friends made was exactly that. Was essentially like you can access data to know which companies are excessively shorted, and you're just going to keep running through them, right? Like the guys from Wall Street Bets, the Reddit, these guys made a lot of money on crypto, right? And it was the crypto profits that they'd started to dump into GameStop and AMC and all this stuff. And there is no reason whatsoever that they won't just keep running through these excessively shorted companies, and you're going to see them pop up all over the place. I mean, Nokia was one, right? There was another one. I've forgotten what it was, but like there was a myriad of them.
yeah. AMC was one, wasn't it? The
Yeah,
cinema company.
AMC. There was another one that I can't remember what it was called. It started with an F, but anyway, there was a number of them, and they were all about to blow. Now, I imagine that what happened was when the gapping happened, when the drop happened for GME, a lot of people lost a lot more money than they thought they were going to. So the momentum sort of dipped slightly, but yeah, it proves the model can work to some effect, right?
Yeah, for some people, yeah,
Yeah, for some
yeah.
people.
But yeah, it's the power of the social media age, really. You can be hyper informed, but you can be hyper misinformed as well.
And I think that you can also that it kind of felt a bit weird to me because there was this whole sort of community idea of holding the stock, pumping all your money into the stock, but the people that were really informed in that conversation on that Reddit stream, they must have known that the drop had to come at some point, right? Because it's illogical to think that you can hold a stock that was worth, what was it, $4 to begin with, at 400 and something dollars exponentially when the company's not making anywhere near that amount of money in revenue. The market cap of a company went from, I don't know, a couple of 100 million to 4 point something billion dollars. Like that's just not sustainable. And, they must have known that. They must have known that. So they were kind of, to me, there was kind of a predatory side of the Wall Street Bets as well, because these guys were saying, hold, 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 hold. And they take their profits, which were drastically massive. And then the people on the lower spectrum, it's so strange how there's a hierarchy to everything that kind of just comes out regardless of what the systems are. And yeah, the meme inside the meme was you had guys taking stimulus checks from the US and banging it straight into GameStop. And those people, a large percentage of those people would have lost money.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, you have to know what you're doing with these things. Not that I do yet, really.
Same. I have no fucking clue.
No,
I look
but
at
I'm
graphs and
learning.
I'm like, oh, that's pretty. It's green or red. Phenomenal.
No, but yeah, I'm learning. So fingers crossed.
I mean, I do think
Maybe
that
one day.
I think that there is this is probably the new era of the way that people make subsidiary money, though, because if you go to let's say you go to, I don't know, pick a bank, Barclays, for Halifax, whatever, and the old way would be that you'd take an ISA with them and you'd put money in it, and that would give you a fixed return over a number of years. Now, if you go and get a savings account, it gives you 0.0% interest, right? Meaning
Yeah,
you earn nothing.
you
So
actually you lose money, don't you? In that case,
yes, exactly. So what is the fucking point? You could put money into something like Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, Google, whatever, and these companies aren't going broke anytime soon. And
yeah,
even if you put in now, the likelihood is you'll earn, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5% a year, maybe, depending on how well they do. And okay, that's not GameStop type returns if you played it properly, but it's return enough that you can earn some money, And I feel like that is going to become way more mainstream, especially if this sort of momentum keeps continuing.
yeah, definitely. It's the new way. Like the savings is just so low, the interest, and maybe this. I mean, that's the whole purpose of the interest being so low, is to get you to spend or invest elsewhere, to get that money into the economy. So I kind of guess it does that. Like most mines in kind of green energy or do you know ETFs?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So most mines in sort of green energy ETFs. So I can feel somewhat like it's going to a good cause as well. Um,
Yeah, I mean,
and it's going to be an exploding industry, really.
definitely. And I think the two markets, I guess, and this is really overarching, but like tech is certainly one of them, right? The more and more that we look at things, that the closer and closer we're getting to an even further technology based society, right? A technologically dominated society. You just think about this, what we were talking about, the vaccines, right? You've got companies that are developing brand new, or maybe not brand new science, but they're taking science to new levels with tech, right? Machine learning and AI and all this stuff. Algorithms are helping these companies to develop things to to beat and make vaccines that will help people with COVID and whatever else. Like if COVID was happening 150 years ago, you
Yeah,
wouldn't see anywhere near the level of progress that we have seen, right?
yeah,
If this was 150 years ago, okay, we've been in lockdown now for nearly a year, on and off, right? But how long do you reckon you'd have been in lockdown 150 years ago, right?
but yeah. I mean, the only one you have for that is Spanish flu, and that was devastating.
Yeah.
Um, and obviously, that was just not good. That was like probably one of the worst pandemics ever. Um, and I think that took 2 years to resolve, and it only resolved because it burnt through so many people.
It was the herd immunity type thing, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But not in a good way, because
not in
everyone
a,
died.
yeah, 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 not in a good way. So, have you ever saw pictures of like some of they call them fever hospitals, where there's just thousands of people just in beds, basically, just like convert a sports hall. You go into bed, you might survive. We'll see. We'll play it out.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so that's not good. We are lucky. As damaging as the lockdowns have been, it's what we will achieve by the end of this is like finishing a pandemic with probably like hundreds of thousands, millions of deaths mitigated worldwide because we've got a vaccine out. It's phenomenal, really. Obviously, there's all these other impacts of the lockdowns, but I don't. I think trying to piece them away as viewing them in isolation of the lockdown itself is hard.
Yeah.
If maybe if we'd actually done lockdowns earlier and stuff, that would have been better. But
I mean, would it though? Because like, I mean, essentially, what to me, there were two reasons for the lockdowns. One was to reduce uh, the sort of bloat on NHS services, right? And the second was to buy time for vaccines to be produced quicker, right? And I guess the third would be you curb the rate of infection. But if we're saying that the the variants are happening independently in states, in countries that are thousands of miles away, and they seem to be occurring regardless of whether people are congregating or not congregating. Like, do you not think we would have been in a similar situation with the variants occurring and all this stuff?
yeah, so have you heard of have you heard of like the New Zealand variant or the Australian one?
No.
Because they've got on top of it because there isn't one kind of
Right,
thing.
right, right, right,
There's like
right.
a little the these variants only happen because it's getting chance to replicate, and the more
Sure.
chance you get to replicate, the more chance you have for these variants. I think this is why this this lockdown that they seem to be like, okay, we need to get on top of borders. Like you can tell the government's been like, we're not just going to do, because the November one was a joke, that national lockdown. Like,
Yeah.
they've just lifted it so that we could go to do Christmas shopping, lifted it too early, and then B117 just smashed us. Like, um, if you give these, the more opportunity it gets to spread, the more opportunity it has to mutate. Um, so it is this part of like getting on top of it early. It's benefit because you lock down less. But there's an interesting study I saw about the countries that are, I mean, it didn't take a scientist to work out, but it's pretty like interesting to see it confirmed, is that countries with higher international travel and like less restrictions on international travel have had much worse deaths. I think there's,
Yeah, of course.
as Britain, as we are like a huge international travel hub, aren't we? Like a lot of international flights stop off. And what this gives is opportunities to seed like outbreaks in different communities as well. So like, say if you've got like uh, the virus is in a certain community, be it across, I don't know, like a age or like a university or something, you can get a local outbreak, but you could maybe get on top of that with local restrictions, or it might just say university students, or I don't know, certain like subpopulation within the city will be quite self-contained. It will sort of burn through them. I don't know if families are interact or something, and then you get on top of it. But what we did over summer was basically let thousands of different outbreaks happen across the country, because everyone went to like Greece and stuff. The summer holiday thing was difficult.
Nuts.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I remember that there was an article. Uh, she's called Devi. I forgot what last name is, but she wrote a good article at the start of summer that said, "We'll pay for these summer holidays with winter lockdowns," and she was right. It was like saying we've drove the numbers down with the lockdown to then have, it was basically 6 weeks, wasn't it? We had that little gap of July and August where
It was tiering system rather than just full lockdown.
yeah, and we had the benefit of being an island, uh, but yeah, I don't know. It is difficult because people compare us to, say, New Zealand is an island, but we're
The land mass and the density of populations is just so different.
yeah, yeah, and it's more just we're a much more like interconnected, multicultural, um, like we've got so many people here who live in Europe, and you can't really like the amount of harm to split up families like that. So I can see why it's really difficult, and like the English Channel might as well be a river. You know what I mean? There's so many ways over, under it, across it, and there's so much international. I mean, freight a really interesting one because, like, I don't know, we have so much. Well, we used to pre-Brexit of like international shipping going in between us and Europe. So what would you do with lorry drivers? Like you don't have that problem as much in New Zealand where they just have shipping containers rather than individual lorries coming over.
Yeah.
So it's difficult, and but I think things could have been done better, definitely.
I mean, almost certainly, right? Almost certainly, and it was just a lack of preparation and a lack of understanding that this sort of thing could happen, and in a way, I determine it to be very much English or British arrogance, right? That oh, okay, if it happens, it's fine. We'll get through it. That's just not the way things work. You know?
Yeah, the kind of exceptionalism. Yeah, and it's definitely been a detriment to us and the US as well. I mean, theirs was abysmal, but it varies state by state. But yeah, definitely wasn't great.
No.
But yeah, it's interesting to see how Biden, what like some of the measures Biden will bring in. I mean, he's really lucky that he has had it good where he's come in just as the vaccines are rolling out, so he can kind of ride that wave. It's interesting to see what sort of measures he might bring in additionally. So in terms of
who knows? Who knows? I mean, I probably try and keep my eyes away from US politics just because I don't want to get depressed.
Yeah, it's spectacle, isn't it? It's all theatre and spectacle.
It's a TV show. Yeah, it's a TV show. It absolutely is. And I kind of feel like the same is here, to be honest. I don't really see much difference.
Did you must have watched all the Capital stuff though.
Yeah, of course. I mean, again, it's like watching a season finale of EastEnders. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
what are we doing, lads?
Yeah,
What are we doing?
I mean, that was so historic though. I think like and just seeing it all live. But that's where all the misinformation comes from, and I don't know. I get a bit worried. Well, I mean, it is worrying stuff because say you compare it to, have you heard of like the beer hall putsch? So that was in 1920s Germany where Hitler and like when the Nazis and stuff were more like a street gang, they decided they were going to take over Berlin, and they got loads of people together and started marching towards somewhere, but the police stopped them. There was just a street fight. It was before they was more organized, and they lost. Hitler got put in jail, and then he never rose to power again, and everything was fine. But no, it wasn't like that. Like I worry that things like that are an indicator that, like, I think people have saw it happen, saw it fail, and be like, oh yeah, they failed, or and it's like, no, historically,
that's not how things go.
no, yeah, and I mean, it took another decade for him to rise to actual like full power. I think I'm not sure, you know what I mean, and then another decade after that for World War II to happen. So like, it's like, are we at the sort of start of something?
I mean, I feel like there's so much division generally in the US that civil war is almost imminent.
Yeah, it can definitely feel seems that way, but I don't know. I think the outspoken people in the US are very outspoken, and I actually think most people are all right, but it's just they've got
I mean, of course,
some very radical elements.
but it doesn't take many people to look. Like, think about a forest fire, right? One person can start a forest fire, but think about the amount of people that can be dragged into a forest fire. Do you know what I mean? Like, it only takes one person or a small collection of people. Like with almost everything, all of these radical groups, in comparison to the mass populace of whatever country they inhabit, they're a tiny percentage, but they make a lot of fucking noise, and they make it seem like they're a lot bigger than they actually are. And in a country like the US, and now I have no real opinion on the gun debate, but it seems crazy to me that you've got a country that has more guns than people, and you expect things to be peaceful.
Yeah. I'm sure they'd say, "Oh, I can defend myself," but no, it's scary, and all these militias popping up. And
I agree that you can defend yourself. The question is against what?
Yeah, someone else with a gun, and then
right. And we can extrapolate that out to the need to defend. I understand that. I think it's a rational argument. However, it's when the need to defend is against somebody and something that was made inside the US, i.e., a radical left or a radical right group that decides to storm a capital but doesn't stop at the capital. They just start shooting people. Then what happens, right? Does the local militia say, well, I'm not allowing this to happen, and they form, and then you have civil war, right? That's what you have. It could be a very small breakout, but dependent on what happens, you could have a triple threat of having to deal the army in, and you've got a radical left and a radical right, and mate, who fucking knows?
Yeah, it's crazy. There's a really good podcast that I listen to called QAnon Anonymous, and they do like different bits on analyzing QAnon, but analyzing conspiracies. And they're doing an interesting one comparing QAnon to ISIS, and like how, especially as well. So like when ISIS has some, obviously it's very radical,
Sure.
but a lot of people who joined ISIS once it was all destabilized were either doing it for jobs because they were forced to. Like a lot of people just didn't really believe in it as much as the sort of radical groups. And it's like, say we do get to that hypothetical situation of I don't know, some sort of weird collapse or something, is I think most people in these groups are quite normal, and are like dragged along for economic reasons and things like that. I think this really touches on a problem we have with history. When we learn history, we learn it through a kind of scope of
the people
ultimate
that win.
Yeah, but of like ultimate evils rather than humans. That it's just a lot of humans with different things. So like I don't know, a lot of people, it's so easy to just keep going back to the Nazis, but a lot of people just voted for Hitler because they thought it'd be better for the economy and things like that. You know what I mean? Or like they were scared of communism because he went against a lot of communists and things like that. And they weren't really on board with all the sort of extreme anti-Semitism stuff, but they just went along as humans. And like, I think there's a massive problem, and like we see either like racism or bigotry. They are really bad. Let me preface this before I make this statement, but like we see them as the ultimate evil. So people think that you have to be really evil, you know what I mean, to have these views. Whereas like it's almost human to be so flawed. And I think when people understand that, we can go more, because people will be like, I'm not a racist because their idea of, and then say, but they obviously, that's a classic trope. Because their idea of a racist is like this really extreme, like
Well, somebody that storms the Capitol, right?
Yeah,
That's the archetype. The archetype is a man with a bare chest, dressed in a fur hat, with a gun around his shoulder, right? Like,
yeah,
or a redneck American, or this or that, or the next thing, like, or an American police officer, or whatever. And all of this stuff is yes, it's archetypal, yes, it's stereotypical, but it's all proliferated through mainstream media of some form, whether it be social media or otherwise. And you know, we are to some extent the architects of our own demise if this stuff comes crashing around us. It really, really is.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And like, I'd say so like expanding on that is like one example for homophobia is like people maybe think of like the Westboro Baptist Church who Louis Theroux did.
Yeah, sure.
Like that might be their idea of like if you to be homophobic you have to be to that level rather than just all the subtle ways that you could exclude people. But as I'd recommend so ContraPoints. I don't know if you've heard of a YouTuber. She just I got this sort of idea from she did an essay on like a video essay on J.K. Rowling and transphobia.
Okay.
It's really interesting, but it goes into like the humanity of bigotry and stuff. So shout out, like I'd really recommend that and her channel.
If you drop me the link, I'll put it in the show notes, and obviously
Yeah,
anyone that fancies it can have a look.
yeah.
I wanted to
But,
pivot slightly onto music, if we could. Like, are you still making music? Are you still writing music and composing and stuff?
no, so I mean, I've only ever sort of DJ'd, so like I've never don't create my own, but I make mixes and stuff. Uh, no, so
I mean, to me, that's composing music, frankly, because you're taking things and making something
yeah,
new. So
yeah. Um, I suppose in a way, but it's a lot easier than producing. But
sure.
no, so this is touching on like dropping out. Is I find it really difficult to engage with that music in that time sense because it reminds me of going out, especially like those sort of things, and I'm like, uh, that isn't a tangible thing that I can do. So it makes me quite sad. But
Yeah.
I've got into new music, so mainly drill. Like I really like UK drill, and it's
Yeah. Sure.
because I have no frame of reference of like going out before or memories pre-pandemic. It's like I've really got into it in the pandemic, and I think it's done well in the pandemic as well because it's quite um, nihilistic. It is quite nihilistic music. It's very quite
Yeah. It's visceral. Yeah.
yeah, and it's quite apt. It matches the times, and it has done really well. Don't know if you see the sort of views they get online,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yep.
and I think it'd be really interesting to see it break America. Um, but yeah, that's the only sort of music that I've been engaging with is drill, just purely because anything else I'm like, oh, I wish I could go out, I wish I could see people. It's frustrating, you know what I mean? Um, yeah, what have you been listening? Like, what's your take on that? Engaging with sort of art and things that remind you of the past.
I mean, as I said, I don't really go out all that much. I mean, I've probably been to a club twice in my lifetime. Um,
Mm.
I've probably, I don't drink, so pubs and stuff, they don't, I'm not full of reminiscent memories of hazy nights where,
Mm.
you've drunkenly fallen through the gutter and had a great time and you finished with that disgustingly enjoyable kebab and whatever else like that. That to me, just, I don't have any connotation to that. But the things that I certainly miss are going to the gym, the society that I have around there. Like in that short tiering system, in summer the gym was open, like, for classes, super restricted classes, but classes, and going to the gym did make me feel sad, because it was like, okay, I'm here, I'm at that place again, but the majority of my friends aren't here. The gym is all taped off and there's screens everywhere and it's not quite the same, and the public shame that you got going to the gym, just turning up on the tube and whatever was strange, and I certainly felt very disconnected emotionally from the whole situation, and cool, it was good to roll again, it was good to train again, but it's just not the same, and it's not the same to not be able to go 4, 5, 6, 7 times a week if you really wanted to. Instead, you're going once in every 6 months. It's just not the same, and food especially. Food's a massive part of my life, as the scales now show. But going to restaurants with my friends and trying different foods and experiencing different things, especially in a place like London where you're so open to essentially every cuisine that you could ever think of. It's that's definitely very, very, very sad, and it's something that, it's something that can't be helped, right? It just has to be accepted. But I discovered new things? Not really.
No.
I've definitely just kind of shelled up. Obviously I'm still doing the podcast, I'm still talking to people, I'm still doing whatever, but in terms of expanding my horizons outside of finances, I guess, not really. I think I've just accepted to just kind of grit my teeth and get through it and hope for the best, really.
Yeah, definitely. It's difficult to engage with new things, and I was just trying to think of what actual other new skills I've got other than right. I suppose I've just been wrapped myself in the science, so I've mainly been doing that, just reading a lot, and the writing myself. But I actually haven't. I think especially at the first lockdown, everyone was like, "Oh, I can get all these new skills and like work on painting." And I just don't think the majority of people just wanted to just each day blends in.
Does. For my partner, especially for Imogen, especially, like, I still have the ability to work, so I'm working from home, right? But Imogen's been on furlough now for the best part of a year, and she's done really well to she goes for a run every morning, she walks the dog, she does this, she does that, she does the next thing, but predominantly the days are just blending. The days are, they're inside. The sofa you see behind me is basically her day. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because after she's gone for a run and done her ballet and walked the dog and had breakfast or whatever, like, what else?
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, what else? And
and this is where the frustration for me lies a lot. Is like I'm used to a really varied lifestyle, so I get, even though I can go to the lab and do the lab work, I get really frustrated because I'm like, oh, this is the same. I just feel Groundhog Day. Going into the lab, doing the same experiment. It's dark. Oh god, the darkness is the worst bit. One of the worst bits. Dark, miserable. You get up, you go in, you do the same experiment, you go home, and then it's like. But I think so. This is where I try and emphasize with like some of a lot of the frustration against the measures, and like being understanding is like, yeah, it's awful, and you can see where some of the more visceral reactions towards it go, and definitely with stuff like the gyms, that's a really hard one, because obviously they are a public health benefit, a mental health benefit, and maybe there's not really been as much emphasis on like them as how much they could. So there's a lot of emphasis around schools. Obviously, it's like the debate of how much does that contribute to community transmission, but I've never really seen anything like how much does a gym and contribute to community transmission, and as like a public health thing, a mental health thing. I think we really need to look at that more, because it was like the summer, pubs were open before the gyms, weren't they?
Oh yeah, months before.
Yeah. So yeah, that tells you what's on the government's mind with that.
It really does, yeah.
So I don't know. It was it'd be good to see more sort of emphasis on those as good for public and mental health. So hopefully they open up soon. But yeah, I don't know. Engaging with stuff from the past and, like we said, gyms, it's difficult, really difficult.
For sure. I mean, I want to sort of end this thing on a more positive note. So, I want to sort of from the scientific perspective, right? You mentioned at the start that you think this lockdown's the last one. Why do you think that? Why do you think this lockdown's the last one?
So this is touch wood. We don't have any really severe variants. So the vaccines rollout is going amazing, which is really good in terms of the UK alone. So that's really good. They're effective. The we will so natural immunity does happen. So I think sometimes some scientists kind of ignore that a natural immunity will contribute towards it, as bad as it is. Like, it's obviously it's not ideal, but if we can have, so I saw a paper, well, not a paper, like a preprint of um, natural immunity in London might have contributed to the fact that the cases are coming down so fast, because obviously London's outbreak was so bad.
Yeah, it's because no one gave a fuck about restrictions.
Yeah. And so natural immunity contribute to it. We've got the vaccines rolling out. The case numbers are coming down, and it seems the government is like, okay, we actually can't have this happen again. We 3 times we've had massive waves. We haven't really took it serious. I think it'll just be, hopefully what will be happening is just like a slow relaxation of different measures, and then that's it. But maybe the question relies on sort of next winter, because they transmit so much better in winter. This is why we're seeing the winter surge. I think hopefully we should just see things roll back in terms of sort of international travel. I'm not going to pretend I know anything like where that's going to be. This is just all opinion, really. But hopefully things just roll back from here. Probably international travel will be a while. But I think sometimes a lot of doomsayers, but all pandemics have ended really at some point, bar arguably HIV, which is like a different ball game, just become endemic. I think there's a feeling that we'll never return to normal for some people, especially at the moment, but it will, be it through natural infection or alone, which is the worst case, but we won't have that, because we've got these really effective vaccines.
I mean, I don't think we will go back to normal, but I don't. But what I mean by that is I'm sure that restaurants will open, gyms will open, international travel will open. All of these things will happen again for sure, and it'll probably be without masks and whatever. But I do think that the global how do I determine this? I think that the way that people are has changed.
Yeah. So the psyche's definitely going to change.
Yes. And I think that the way that people interact with the world, interact with their jobs, interact with each other will and has changed.
For better and worse, isn't it, though? Yeah.
Absolutely.
So when I say normal, I just mean like our sort of freedoms in what we can do.
Yeah, a functioning society, a functioning.
I actually think I think people will wear masks on transport for quite a while after, maybe several years, which might be a good thing for like flu's been smashed to bits by all the measures, which is good. Because normally we have like 10,000 people a year die of flu. I mean, it might be the case that they've just died of COVID, which is probably the case, to be honest. But yeah, and testing and stuff. But hopefully it's something now is we have supply lines and factories and stuff set up for rapid deployment of mRNA vaccines so that we can scale up um, when, not if, when the next pandemic happens, because they're happening faster at an increased rate because of our relationship with the environment.
Yeah.
But when it happens, we'll have all these systems now to deal with it quicker, a lot quicker.
Maybe.
Hopefully.
Maybe.
Bar us politically sort of forgetting.
Yeah, and I honestly, I would not be shocked in the slightest if that's how this goes.
Yeah.
I really wouldn't. I really wouldn't be surprised if. I mean, maybe I would be surprised because, you know, regardless of what people determine the government and whatever to be, is there are plenty and plenty and plenty of really intelligent people inside those governments, right? Now they may not be Boris Johnson specifically, but you know there are people that know their shit that work in those government organizations that create the papers and create, you know, the mandates that then get passed up the chain and reviewed and blah 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 blah. So, you know, it would surprise me, I suppose, if people didn't heed lessons from this. But what wouldn't surprise me is that if the funding just doesn't arrive, because, you know, if the policies just don't change to reflect the interests of the sole people that are in government at that time, we know that, for instance, you said it perfectly. Boris opened up pubs before he opened up anything else, really.
Yeah.
And whether that's because of his own alienated view that pubs are the epicenter of the UK society, or whether he just fucking fancied a pint, right? Who knows? Yeah. But
it's for political will, isn't it? Political gain,
right.
Because
right.
He operate, especially the current Conservative Party, just operate on a lot of theatre and kind of ideas of nationalism, and it was like the Great British Pub, you know what I mean?
Yawn, but yes, correct.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely the politics, but I don't know. I'm hopeful that these factories are set up now, these supply lines, there's a greater awareness that the future of pandemics will be impacted positively by all this. So hopefully that is some of the good things we can take away. And yeah, hopefully the international collaboration and the political will maintains some stability, and we've learned. Not, we'll see. We'll see.
We will see. Well, look, as always, it's been a pleasure to speak to you. Before you go, please, can you tell people where they can find your blog, where they can find you on any social media?
Yeah. So my blog is immunopolitics.wordpress. So if you just Google immunopolitics WordPress, I haven't got the SEO to get anywhere higher unless you specify that. You'll find it. So I've wrote pieces on my latest one was on the mRNA vaccines in depth, so if you're interested in that. And then on Twitter, it's Daniel Dimmock 2. So that's my academic Twitter. So you can find me chatting amongst all scientists and some dog memes, some pictures of my dog and whatnot on there. But yeah, that's my main ones.
Beautiful. Well, look, I'll put the if you can link me to the YouTube channel that you were speaking, I'll put that in the show notes. I'll put your blog in the show notes, and obviously I'll put the various Twitter stuff up as well. But look, I mean, these conversations are always really informative for me, especially because, as I said to you, like I've done my absolute best to stay away from basically anything that's dogmatic about the pandemic, and in the same vein, I don't know the right people in the scientific community to go and follow and listen to. So you're sort of my you're my representative for the entire scientific community when it comes to COVID. So yeah, I
no
mean,
sweat.
no, mate, not at all. No pressure at all. yeah, these are really always beneficial for me. And look, I am sad to hear that you're struggling as well, but I feel like everyone is, you know, and there's almost a collective struggle here where people combine together, obviously not in person, but people can combine together emotionally to understand that everyone is kind of struggling, right? And you know, yeah, people have your back. So
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's good to verbalize that and just be honest and open.
yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't see the point in saying, you know, the stiff upper lip bullshit that Britain has is just that a lot of the time, right? It's bullshit, and you know, you should absolutely be able to air your feelings if your feelings are that you are struggling, right? Why wouldn't you be honest about that, you know?
Yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, I'm not a stiff upper lip kind of guy anymore.
No.
The older I get, the less I care.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. Well, look, mate, as always, it's been a pleasure to speak to you, and I hope to speak to you soon.
yeah, be good. Cheers, Harry.
All right, mate.